Hello, everyone. So, we talked about energy, we talked about photosynthesis, but now we need to understand photosynthesis to another core. We have to understand the parts of the leaf. So, today we're going to learn the parts of the leaf and their functions, determine the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs, determine the difference between gymnosperms and angiosperms, learn the parts of the flower. So, what's in the leaf? Well, we kind of can know a little bit. But you remember the leaf stores glucose, right? And that is made from photosynthesis. But how does it store it? Do y'all remember how it's stored? Cellulose, right? This is a review reflect. After we place a kind of few drops of iodine on the plant leaves, it should look like this. Whenever you see the darkness, that means it is positive for cellulose. It means it can be very starchy. So, what's in the leaf? Well, again, the glucose produced forms of polysaccharides, which we know is called starch, and cellulose, which is found in the cell walls of plant cells. So, autotroph versus heterotroph. We already did the vocabulary, but it's now to talk about what that vocabulary meant. Autotroph is just like an automatic car. Auto. It produces food on its own. This is plants. They use photosynthesis, right? So if a plant is hungry, they gotta be like, I'm just gonna look at the sun and eat, right? Well, we have heterotrophs, which means we don't get our energy from just looking at the sun and saying, "Hey, I'm hungry." This is where consumers, such as ourselves, gain energy by eating autotrophs. Okay, which is going to be plants and animals. So as an animal and mammal, we can eat a salad and it gives us a little bit of energy, right? Or we may eat a cow who ate some grass, which again, how energy flows. So heterotrophs, if we're really hungry, we got to go in the kitchen and cook the food, right? Autotrophs just sit outside and be like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna look at the sun and eat a little bit. So we're one of our next lessons is ecology, and we're gonna talk about this again. But just a quick thing, autotrophs are producers, okay? They, again, can use energy from the environment to make food. So we are talking about photosynthesis, which obviously photo means light, right? There's also one called chemosynthesis, and chemo is chemicals. So they will use chemicals for their food. All right, so consumers, this is us. This is us, okay? Consumers, heterotrophs, organisms that rely on other organisms for their energy. So we're still talking about energy, right? So herbivores is what only eats plants, okay? Carnivores eat animals, so they only eat meat. Omnivores is what we are as humans. We eat animals and plants. This is how the energy is passed on. Spirophytes is obtains energy by eating dead organisms. And this right here is going to be like your mushrooms and the fungi and stuff. Detrivores is feeds on plants and animal remains. That's like your vultures. All right, so we have to understand um, how we can get energy throughout the ecosystem. Well, remember, energy transfer is a constant flow of energy. But because we're talking about photosynthesis, what is the whole primary source of energy for plants and for everything? The sun. So the sun is the primary source. It recycles all of the resources. Now, of course, we have to understand the whole cycle. Again, this goes into our ecology lesson, but this is going to help us identify photosynthesis inside the atmosphere. So once the sun hits, remember it hits the plants, and the plants are producers. Then, as us as consumers, we take in energy from the plants, who obviously had to go through photosynthesis. So, living systems require input of energy to maintain organization, and this is all coming from the energy from the sun, which is now changed into chemical energy that allows everybody to carry out life processes. Nutritional relationships allows energy to transfer from one organism to another. So as the tree eats energy from the sun, the cow eats the little grass, and then we eat the cow, and thus far. We have to identify the difference between the food chain and the food web. Okay, food chain is just a series of steps in the ecosystem where organisms can transfer by eating and being eaten. Okay, so real steps: flower is ate by the caterpillar, caterpillar is ate by the frog, frog is ate by the snake, and the snake is ate by the owl. Okay, the food web means complex, multiple ways of how the energy is transferred. So the food web here, we have the flower is ate by grubs, bugs. Some of those bugs are ate by bugs. Those bugs might be ate by birds, and the birds is ate by owls. So there's always a main person at the very end. Now each level, though, each step is considered a trophic level. So here we have producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and decomposers, right? So producers first, then it's primary, secondary. Sometimes we have tertiary, then we have the decomposers as our fourth step. Energy pyramid. Now this shows the energy transfer and loss. Okay, everything is lost basically by 10%. So if we start off with the 1,000, we're only going to get 100 for the producer. So if the plants are getting 1,000 from the sun, when the cow gets it, they're getting 100. And when we eat the cow, we only get 10. And when we die, they're only going to get 1%. But now let's get back to the idea. Photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis, we have to understand there's two different types of plants, though. We have gymnosperms and we have angiosperms. Gymnosperms is going to be like your pine trees, okay? See, these are seed plants that bear seeds directly on the surface of the cones. Angiosperms is flowering plants, so they are covered with a layer. Now, something you probably never understood. When you see a pine tree, there is a female part and a male part. Yes, there is a female part and a male part. You will never look at pine trees the same. Um, So you see the pine cone, right? So the pine cone that falls from the tree, that's a woman. The more she's open, the more eggs she has released. So when you see the pine cone that's pretty much flapped open, yes, she has a lot of eggs that she released. But when you see a pine cone that's closed and like really small and closed, the best terms to put it, yes, it's considered your virgin pine cone because she was not able to reproduce yet. Now, plants, if you look at the flowers have this long stick that sticks out of them a lot of times. That is called the pistil. But inside of it, there is, and at the very top, there's a stigma, and that catches the pollen. And so inside of there, there's actually an ovary, just like humans. Now, with photosynthesis, we have to understand the tropisms that come with their behavior. So, like, we understand that plants do grow. Um, but gravity, we have gravitropism, which responds to the plant to grow. This plant is still growing upwards even though it's falling over, right? That's gravity. Hydrotropism means the plants respond to water. Hydro means water. Gravity means gravity. Right here, the gravity means gravity. So the plants will actually get their roots to touch those water or get as close as possible. We also have thigmotropism. Thigmo means touch. So you ever seen like a vine and it wraps around? We also have chemo, which we already talked about. Chemo means chemicals, but we also call this photo, and that's light. So you ever been like your plants on the side of your house, let's say your bushes, you notice that they like really pretty on the outside, and you look by your house and they be like all dead sticks because it's response to light. So the plants grow where the light is. So here is what photosynthesis takes place. So leaves are the primary state of photosynthesis. Now, what part of the leaves does it? We understand that it is the chloroplast. But that is not the only process that takes place in leaves, okay? We also have transpiration. This is where water and oxygen are lost. So remember how we do have photosynthesis, but how does that leave the cell, and how does that leave and get into the atmosphere? Well, it leaves through transpiration, and that's called through the stomata, okay? And that's regulated by guard cells, okay? So leaves. The broad portion of the leaf is the blade. This is the blade that you see, okay? And it's attached to the stem right here by a petal. Now you have to understand the different types of leaves. We have simple, which is one leaf. We have compound, which grows like this beside, almost like stitches. You see it? And then we have double compound where they grow like stitches, but then they also grow at angles. These are your best ones. So simple, compound, and double compound. So this is already a compound, but it's also doubled. So let's get to these parts of the leaf. So the very top part of the leaf, and you see this picture here. You need to take note of this picture because you will see this again. The cuticle is the very top. Like on the top part of your nail, you have a cuticle, right? And that prevents for your nail not to kind of move and get a waxy layer of your nail. Well, this is the same thing with a leaf. It is a waxy covering that prevents water loss. We want to have the cuticle so water would not be lost, okay? Top layer, cuticle. Second layer is this one right here, the upper epidermis, okay? So dermis is basically known as skin, and we have skin, right? And the skin that you see, where your color is, your melanin is there. This right here is your single protective layer of cells along the top edge. This contains no chlorophyll, chloroplast. So this allows me to know photosynthesis is not happening here because photosynthesis has to happen with chloroplast and chlorophyll. So that upper epidermis is just another protective layer. It's just a skin layer, which is here. Now we have the palisade. So my biggest thing is palisade has photosynthetic cells. This is where most of your photosynthesis occurs, and it has all of your chloroplasts. So palisade to me starts with P. So palisade would be our photosynthetic layer. And as you see here, it looks like the little chloroplasts and stuff, right? So that's the palisade area. So again, chloroplast, we do know this is a place that captures light energy and produces food. But it is broken down into three parts that we talked about in our previous notes. We have thylakoids, which are here. We have the grana, which is the inner stacks. And then we have the stroma, which was the liquid. Remember chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is embedded with the membrane that makes us see green, but it's the light trapping pigment, right? So let's keep on going with the leaf. Then we have the spongy mesophyll. Now here, you also have some photosynthetic cells. So most of the photosynthesis takes place in palisade. And we also have the spongy layer that contains photosynthetic cells, which is below the palisade layer. And as you see here, it almost looks like a sponge. You see the gaps, and then you see the cells here that have the chloroplasts. So it contains airspace just like a sponge. But it's also like a sponge because you see a vein. The vein for plants, and as you see in the leaf, carries water and food supply. So if there was ever a leakage, the sponge was able to absorb it. So this is the main part. This is where the vein is, and the vein is called the xylem and phloem. We also call the vein the vascular bundle. Okay, and it's just thick wall, and it's inside the spongy layer. This again is responsible for transporting food and water. And we want to have that because inside of your sponge, if it can absorb it, the plant can still eat. So xylem is water. Phloem has the F sound, is food. So now how did the oxygen go into the atmosphere, and how does the plants take in carbon dioxide? Well, that comes through the stomata. So this is the whole purpose of how photosynthesis does occur. So the stomata opens up for gas exchange at the lower epidermis. Okay, as you see, it has a guard cell. So the guard cell opens up, makes a little mouth. This is how the exchange happens. When it's closed, it does not happen, right? We want to make sure you don't lose water. So obviously they pretty much close at night, right? Is the sun open at night? No. So they don't really do photosynthesis like that at night. So it closes up so it can save its little bit of energy as well as save water supply. So stomatas are open when the guard cells relax during periods where the plant has access water. So if we have too much water and the plants don't want to drown, they open up. Stomata closes during periods when the plant needs to keep water. So especially like during the summer, they try to close as much as possible or they are de-dried. So guard cells. If we was in class, we would actually did this lab. And again, guard cells is just like a guard. He opens it up and closes it when it's needed. And again, this is the lower epidermis. This is where they're located. And as you see here, we have the stomatas are located inside the lower epidermis. This is at the very, very bottom of the leaf. The guard cells is on top. Stomata is the inside. So the outside layer, if it's open, you'll see it. So again, the guard cells is here. The stomata is the little darker part. And you can kind of tell if it's open or closed. So the lower epidermis, remember that we have the upper, we have a lower, which is just a really small, thin layer, but it protects the bottom of the leaf.